Did you discuss the whistleblower with Prince Zaid leading to his forced resignation? It says so in documents that were released today by AIDS Free World. And you should answer the question. You should look at the documents and you should answer the questions.
All right, well, noted. As for the Secretary General, I believe it was in the spring. Mr. Lee.
I have two questions, maybe one fast and one longer. The fast one is, I'd asked you about this UN peacekeeping accepting police and soldiers from Burundi, and you had said that there's some process. So I want to ask you very specifically. I've now seen a letter that's circulating, that's been submitted to the UN to appoint a Mr. Godefroid Bizimana, who's a police officer, of which there are photographs firing into the crowd, to be a D1 police officer in MINUSMA in Mali. And I wanted to know, how does the stated human rights due diligence policy apply in this case, which the UN says it's so concerned about?
All right, well, let me check. I hadn't heard of this.
The other one has to do with, and I'm sorry to ask you this, but I've asked a lot about this, and so I'll ask this now. It has to do with the nephew of the Secretary General. And I read what was said in Seoul. You were on the trip, but I've been obtained and am extremely troubled by a court filing regarding Mr. Dennis Joo-hyun Bahn, in which basically the same structure of what was alleged in the Vietnam building, false documents, making claims that weren't true, were alleged in a U.S. court involving real estate in Pennsylvania, that he presented himself as a representative of a real estate company not in Pennsylvania, opened up a false bank account, solicited money from individuals, and put it into it. And this is a sworn affidavit, and the individual said that he called the FBI and as well as the Fort Lee police and produces a document showing that he set up a fake company. So I understand people are not responsible for their relatives. This is why I'm sorry to ask you this, but it does seem to me extraordinary that this type of fraud is alleged against a relative of the Secretary General who's at a company doing business with the UN. So I'd like some kind of a comment on why the Secretary General apparently never disclosed that his nephew works at Collier's, and what his response is to these practices that seem to involve invoking the name of the UN and of the Secretary General to get business.
I think his Secretary General spoke very clearly on his relationship with his nephew. I think we've briefed you on the few contracts that Collier's had with the UN, which predate the Secretary General. They now, I think, have some sort of involvement in the FF building, which came because they took over or renamed a company that previously managed it. The FF building's been occupied by the UN for decades or a long time, way before Ban Ki-moon became Secretary General. He has no knowledge, he has no update, he has no involvement and no knowledge of what this gentleman does. And I think if you have any questions, you could also ask the nephew.
When's the last time he spoke with his nephew? I mean, it just
he has no contact with his.
The nephew called the newspaper in South Korea to try to do damage control. So there's clearly
I think he has no contact with his nephew.